live look at Capitol Hill as the sun comes up over Washington. Joining us now, former presidential candidate and former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Democrat Pete Buttigieg. Great to see you, Pete. His new PAC, Win the Era, rolled out a slate of endorsements just yesterday with a focus on electing down-ballot Democrats to local positions across the country. We want to hear a lot more about that. And Mayor Pete, Mike Barnicle has the first question.
Mayor Pete, good to see you today. Thanks for joining us. Local down-ballot elections. Let's talk a little local and statewide stuff. As you know, I'm sure you know, we're living right now in a country filled with anxiety and vulnerability about what might happen to each individual in your family or whatever with regard to the virus. And yet in Washington, D.C., we get just a series of mixed messages from the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, who opposes one day what his experts have said the prior day. What can Joe Biden do about restoring the trust, not just in government, but in leadership of this government going forward?
Well, I think what we have in Joe Biden is somebody who's not just describing what a different presidency could be, he's modeling it. Every time he speaks up, it's with a basis in fact, and it's with the fundamental compassion and empathy and decency that Joe Biden has been known for throughout his career. And, you know, that kind of empathy should be table stakes. It should be one of the basics that we expect from our American president. But right now, we don't have that. And I think that's costing us. Just having a president who does not care about people. In addition to all of the mismanagement and all of the mixed signals and the contradictory messages coming from a White House where, you know, the first rule of dealing with an emergency is to be clear, to be straightforward, to have a consistent message. We just don't have that now. It's costing lives. And I think back to early in the Trump administration, talking to conservative friends who knew that he wasn't a good leader, but we kind of consoled themselves by saying, you know, it's hard to sink a ship. Doesn't matter that much who the president is. Now we're seeing why it matters. But having said all that, the presidency is not the only office that matters. That's the message we're trying to send with wintheera.com and the Win the Era PAC endorsements. So in addition to doing everything in my power to make sure that Joe Biden is our next president, I also want to make sure that we don't take our eye off the ball with all of these other critical races going on. You know, with our health on the line, we're seeing how governors and mayors are stepping up to protect their residents and constituents. With our democracy on the line, we're being reminded how in this country, for better or for worse, elections are run by state and even county officials. This is a time for us to make sure that we not only have the right presidential leadership, but that we're getting great people elected and reelected up and down the ticket.
John Heilman has the next question. John?
Hey, Mayor Pete, I want to ask you, we've talked a little bit on the show in the last, well, today and in days past. You know, you look at the numbers in this presidential race, and Joe Biden has a lot to be encouraged by. But there are a ton of Democrats out there who tell me every day that they are nervous about one particular aspect of how this is all playing out, and that is the sort of image that Donald Trump is trying to capitalize on of him being kind of a man in motion. He is out there. He is going to Pennsylvania. He's going to Arizona. He has the White House podium. He's in the middle of this giant story on the pandemic, obviously in many cases making more problems than he is benefiting himself. But he's there, and he's in the middle of this thing. Joe Biden is in his home observing CDC guidelines, but he's basically kind of in his basement in Delaware. And the sense of him being kind of pinned down there and not having an official or unofficial way to get into this story. I just hear from Democrats every day that they worry about that. So I ask you, as someone who ran a very strong digital campaign, who built a kind of a movement around your candidacy, what kind of advice are you and the people around you who helped you with that giving to the Biden campaign to help him deal with the challenges that he has in running this campaign in this environment as someone with no public office?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to remember is that being in constant motion doesn't serve you that well if the motion is that you're just chasing your tail. And so the president's certainly getting more attention, but that's not always going to be to his benefit, especially when things he's doing and saying don't make sense. Having said that, it's definitely the case that this is a time that calls for innovation and new ways of reaching people. And so I think it's going to be very important for the Biden campaign to continue to find ways, even if there's not the kind of usual pressing the, shaking the hands and getting out on the trail that we think of as part of presidential campaigning, that we do have to make sure that the message is getting everywhere, even when a candidate can't get out everywhere. And that's where things like, for example, I think they've been doing a great job adopting an approach that we found served us very well in the campaign, of having what we call digital captains, basically getting out there to people who kind of organically, spontaneously, on their own, on social media, show that they're big supporters, kind of the equivalent to the person who would, in real life, walk through the doors of your campaign office on their own because they were just excited about you. Finding those same people online and then giving them the kind of toolkit from the official campaign to help enhance their ability to get out in their social networks, reach out to their friends and family. Because at the end of the day, that's always the most convincing way that a message can reach somebody. It's one thing to hear about a candidate from a campaign ad or see him speak on TV. It's another when somebody you know and trust who's in your life says, hey, I'm voting for Joe Biden, and I think you should too, and here's why.
Mayor Buttigieg, it's Willie Geist. Great to see you on the show again. I want to ask you about what's going on in the state of Indiana with regards to coronavirus. As much as we talk about the failures at the top of the federal government to address this, and rightly so, this is a war that is being waged inside of states like Indiana, inside of states like yours in South Bend. Decisions having to be made between public health and businesses and jobs and getting people back to work. How is Indiana doing? There's been some national attention given to the state of Indiana for the good job the governor has done there, slowly reopening, keeping the number of cases down, assuring hospitals are not overwhelmed. What does coronavirus look like on the ground in South Bend, Indiana?
Here in South Bend, my successor's done, I think, a great job of making sure that there is factual information about how to stay safe and treading cautiously, making sure that we don't just try to snap back to normal before we're ready and wind up right back where we started with more human and economic damage. This shouldn't be a partisan issue, but it is disturbing to see how, especially when the president started embracing these so-called reopen or liberate protesters, even though that was a fringe, it was like a signal went out to Republican governors across the country that made, I think, even those trying to do the right thing have a harder time doing it, and a lot of them just go off the rails. I think that the response here in Indiana has been mixed, but I'll say this. Indiana is not one of the states where the governor is out just preempting mayors making decisions. You look at what's happening in Texas. The state really has their boot on the throat of mayors and county officials trying to save lives. We've seen it in Georgia. And it's shocking to me to see in case after case, governors overruling those who are on the ground closest to the people who really should be those that you listen to, both in terms of public health officials and in terms of mayors. So I'm looking not only for governors who are showing strong, clear leadership, but governors who are showing the ability to listen.
Pete Buttigieg, it's always good to see you, and we love what you're doing. Thank you very much for being on the show this morning.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.